everyone, it's Casey from Sew in Love. Let's turn all of these pieces into this adorable Rising Sun quilt block. For this Rising Sun quilt block, we will need one 6.5 by 6.5 square. We will also need 4 3.5 by 6.5 rectangles, 8 3.5 by 3.5 squares, 4 3.5 by 3.5 squares, 2 4 by 4 squares, and 2 more 4 by 4 squares. This Rising Sun quilt block has 3 different square techniques in it. So first we have the square in a square. We also have flying geese. And then in the corners, we have half square triangles. We are first going to start with our square in a square. Now there are several different ways you can do this. I am doing it this method. It does create quite a few triangle scraps, but I save those and I will use them in some type of scrappy project later. So we're gonna start with our 3.5 by 3.5 squares, and we are going to just draw our diagonal line corner to corner on the back of all 4 of those squares. So once you have your diagonal lines drawn on the back of your 4 3.5 by 3.5, we are then going to take and attach them to our 6.5 by 6.5 square. So we're going to start by putting right sides together, and we're going to start with 2 of the squares. And we're just going to line that up that way, and then we're going to take our second one down in the bottom corner. And we're going to line that one up. So our first 2 are lined up just like this. We are moved over to the sewing machine. So now where we drew our diagonal line from corner to corner, we are going to sew right on our diagonal line. So I'm going to line that up. Going to do my back stitch. And I'm going to sew right along that diagonal line. And I'm going to back stitch. Then I'm going to flip it over to my other square down in the corner. Make sure he's nice and lined up. Sewing right on the diagonal line. So it's hard to see because I'm using a gray thread, but I did sew my diagonal line right along where I drew my line. So when you flip up that corner, you're gonna have your corners for your square and your square. Now to get that, we wanna cut off this extra material. So I'm going to line up my ruler at 1/4 inch from my sewn line. And using my rotary cutter, I'm just going to cut off those extra triangles. Quarter inch. Cut off my extra. So this is now what our square looks like. So now we're going to attach the other two squares in the opposite corners, and then we're going to press the back. So again, I'm just lining up my squares. So I want, this is where my line is going this way, and I want this guy to be at this point. So I'm gonna line it up, put a clip on it to hold it in place, and I'm gonna do the exact same thing. Here is my line, here is my point. I'm going to put him up in the corner, line him up, and clip. I'm now going to take this back to my sewing machine and sew these two squares on. This is now what the first part of our square looks like. So, sewn line here, I'm going to trim my triangles off at 1/4 inch on both sides. I'm going to take it over to my ironing board and press. So I'm just going to put it down here quick and double check 6.5 by 6.5. The only thing that I trimmed off were just some little extra threads that were around there. If you need to trim it down to 6.5 by 6.5, then do that. So we're going to set this one aside, and we are going to move on to our corners, which are our blue and black, and we are going to make some half square triangles using 4-inch blocks. Right, we're going to start by drawing our diagonal lines on 2 of our 4-inch blocks for our half square triangles. We're going to then take the ones that we put our line on, and we're going to do right sides together. We're going to line them up, place a couple clips or pins if you prefer. On our first block, we sewed on the diagonal line. For our half square triangles, we are going to do 1/4 inch to the right and to the left of that line on both squares. So I'm going to place my presser foot 1/4 inch away from my diagonal line, going to back stitch, put in my second square, line it up at 1/4 inch. Now I did chain stitch those together, so I'm just going to use my seam ripper to take those back apart. And then I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to sew the other side. Now that we have our 1/4 inch sewn on there, I'm going to remove my clips, my squares back apart, and again, I'm going to take my ruler, this time I'm going to cut on my drawn line. So right down the middle. For both squares. And now I have 4 half square triangles. Going to take those over to the ironing board, and I'm going to press my seams open. I have my seams pressed open. So now I'm going to trim off my dog ears and trim my squares down to 3.5 by 3.5. To trim my half square triangle, I am going to use my ruler. And I'm going to place it so that it is lined up with the diagonal. And at the 3.5 mark, there's a little corner here, all the way around. Hold that in place. And now I have my 3.5 by 3.5. I'm going to do that with all 4 of my squares. We are now on to our last set, which is the flying geese in our block. So these are flying geese. And we're going to take one of our squares. Actually, I'm going to draw all my lines on here first, is what I'm going to do. So on all 8 of these squares, I'm going to do my diagonal lines. Okay, now I have all of my lines drawn. So again, I want where I started my line up here in the corner, I want that to be in the center. So I'm going to line that up. I'm going to clip it in place, and I'm going to do that for all 4 because I am going to chain stitch these versus breaking my thread every time. Multiple ways to do flying geese. This one probably creates the most scraps, but I'm okay with that because I use a lot of scraps. So I have all 4 of them clipped together. I'm going to take it to the sewing machine. Now, just as I placed my line starting here in the center, that's also how I'm going to sew it. So I'm going to start sewing from this corner. I'm sewing right on the diagonal line. And line your next one up, same direction. Continue doing this until you have all 4 of those sewn on. Now I have the one side done. These are chain stitched together for sake of time, so I'm going to take those back apart. And now I have my 4 units again. So this one is going to flip up like this, just how we did on our first block. So here is my diagonal line, and I'm going to cut my triangle off at 1/4 inch for all 4 units. 1/4 inch. So again, we're going to flip that. And that is part of our flying geese. So let's do that for all 4 units. Okay, I have trimmed all 4 of my flying geese. So I'm going to take them over to the ironing board, and I am going to press my seams open. I have all 4 of my seams pressed open. So now I'm going to finish off my flying geese by adding the other side. So again, here is where my drawn line is, and that is going to go to the center of my rectangle on all 4 units. Now back to the sewing machine to sew on our other side. Again, we're going to chain stitch these together, but I'm going to start at the center where my drawn line is. I'm going to line it up right on that line that I drew. Going to back stitch. Again, they are chain stitched together. So we're just going to take those apart quick with our seam ripper. And now we have our 4 units. So when we flip up this corner, we have our flying geese. But first, we're going to trim off our excess. Same thing, using my ruler, I'm gonna line it up at 1/4 inch. And take off that extra and throw those in my scrap pile. I'm going to do that with all 4 of my units. Those are all trimmed, so back to the ironing board to press open the rest of our seams. Okay, I have all of my seams pressed open and my flying geese are now ready. So now we are going to do our block assembly. We are going to take our square and a square, and he is the center. We are going to take a half square triangle. I want my black towards the outside of my square. So I will just place them all where I want them to go before I do my final block assembly. So just like that. Now I'm going to take my flying geese and they are going to point in towards your 6.5 by 6.5. So all of those points will go in. And now it is time to sew it all together to get our finished block. I am now going to sew together so that I have a finished block. So I have this section, I have the middle section, and I have this section. I am going to sew in a particular direction so that my square stays as square as possible. So I'm going to start with the top row and I'm going to sew this unit to my half square triangle. So I'm going to line it up and I'm going to nest my seams, meaning I'm going to make sure that they are lined up and tucked right into each other, just like that. Going to clip it and I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch right down the side here. So I have sewn my 1/4 inch along there, so when I open it up, this is what my top part of my block looks like. I am then going to take it and flip it to this half square triangle, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to nest my seams, making sure they are lined up. I'm going to clip that together, take it to my sewing machine, and sew down this line 1/4 inch. I did my 1/4 inch here, so when I open it up, this is the top of my block. Do you see how my points are all nice and lined up there? Now we're going to move to the middle section, and to do the middle section, I'm going to bring my first flying geese over, just like this, to my square and a square. I'm going to line up my points. I'm going to clip it and take it over to my sewing machine. And I'm going to sew 1/4 inch down this way. I have sewn my 1/4 inch. So when I open up that block, my 2 points, the point of my flying geese and the point on my square and a square, should be lined up just like this. So now I'm going to take my other side and I'm going to flip it and do the same thing. I'm going to line it up. Make sure my points look good. Clip it in place, and I'm going to sew down this edge 1/4 inch. I have sewn my 1/4 inch, so when I open it up, we now have our middle section done. We are now on our bottom section, and we're going to do that the same way. So I'm going to take my middle piece, my flying geese, over to my half square triangle. I'm going to line up, nest my seams, put a clip on that, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch. We have our 1/4 inch, so when we open, and then we are going to take our unit and move it over to our half square triangle. Nest and line up our seam. Clip. Actually, one over here. And sew down here 1/4 inch. We did our 1/4 inch, so when we open it up, there is the bottom of our block, and now we have our 3 sections. But first, I'm going to take these pieces over to the ironing board, and I am going to press open all of my seams. I have all of my units with all of my seams pressed open. So this is my middle unit. This is my top, and this one is my bottom. So now we are going to sew in the downward direction. So we're going to take the top, we're going to flip it over to the middle section. We're going to line up those seams, nest them, just get them nice and tucked in close together. Use a clip. Same thing over here. I'm going to line up my seams and clip. So we will now take this section over to the sewing machine, and we are going to sew 1/4 inch and sew that top piece to the middle piece. I have now did my 1/4 inch all the way down so that when I open that up, my top is sewn to my middle. I am going to continue downward. So I'm going to take my top piece, flip it right side to my bottom piece. I'm going to match up my seams. I'm going to do that same thing. Clipping it in place. Match up my seam over here. And for our last section, 1/4 inch all the way down. This is our last section. So when we start in this corner, we want to make sure that these seams are also nested here in the corner. I didn't clip them, but I'm just going to line them up. Drop my presser foot at 1/4 inch. I'm going to start and then back stitch. And then I'm just going to do 1/4 inch all the way down. Now, when you get to this section here, just probably kind of hard to see. On the underside of that is another seam that is pressed open. You always want to make sure that before it goes through your needle, that your seam on the back side is also still pressed open. Approaching my next seam and clip, so I'm going to make sure that that is still nice and lined up and that that back side is still open. Don't forget to backstitch. And we have now completed our Rising Sun block. So now that we have completed our block, it is all sewn together. We still have these last seams here that we need to press open. And then we will be all done with our block. Kind of like to finger press it open to begin with. It just makes it a little easier once I get it over to the ironing board. When you are pressing your seams open, you want to make sure that you are just placing your iron down. You're not doing the full ironing motion, because if you do, all of these other seams that you've pressed open will get all messed up. So you're going to press, lift your iron, press down, lift your iron, and press down. You want to keep those seams as nice and neat as possible for your quilt top. Use my clapper here to set my seams. It just helps to keep them nice and flat. We now have completed our Rising Sun quilt block. This is what the front looks like. And this is the back. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you also make a Rising Sun quilt block using your own color scheme or pattern. If you do, drop it in the comments, send me a picture, and show me what you're making. Please make sure to like, follow, and subscribe, and thanks again for watching this video.